Are you someone who deals with a lingering sense of tightness or shoulder impingement around the anterior side of your shoulder? You've done all your mobility drills, you've had needles jammed in there, you've had your stretches for 30 minutes trying to create some space, but nothing quite seems to get to the root of the issue? Well, chances are that you probably aren't going deep enough to reorient how the shoulder actually rests in the shoulder capsule itself. You see, you can do all the manual manipulations and stretches in the world that you want, but if your shoulder keeps reverting back to a position that is going to increase the likelihood of impingement, then the chances of it coming back are reasonably high. So not only do we want to try to create some sense of space, but we also want to try to reorient the tension that actually supports the shoulder. So throughout the course of this video, we are going to do exactly that. Not only are we going to try to create more space so that you get a sense of space and length in through your shoulder, but also go through some corrective techniques that will hopefully offer a new sense of support for your shoulders to reduce the likelihood of us getting back into positions that can be problematic. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. So before we get into some of the exercise and technique portions, let's get a better grasp on why this might be happening in the first place. I'm of the mindset that unless we understand some of the mechanisms that can be contributing to it, we're gonna have a difficult time actually getting to the root of the problem. Everyone's gonna be a little bit uniquely different, so I hope what I offer in this take is gonna be helpful for you. So one of the primary reasons as to why you get this sense of shoulder impingement or tightness, especially around this area, and something that you may commonly hear is pec tightness. So your upper pec fibers are pulling the humerus into internal rotation, and all you got to do is stretch your pecs out, and that is going to magically change how your scapula, your humerus, and your shoulder girdle interact with one another, and it's going to alleviate this sense of impingement. And although going into, say, like a pec stretch on the wall, doing something like this may offer some temporary relief, when your arm comes back to your side and you start to go through your day-to-day functions and movements, you didn't actually change anything. You didn't reorganize how your nervous system actually responds to where your humerus, your scapula, and everything are in place and how they relate to one another. So one of the primary reasons as to why this might happen is because of, we'll say, humeral internal rotation. And it's not just because the humerus is getting pulled in, but it could be because these upper ribs are actually getting pulled down. So if these upper ribs get pulled down, it's going to pull the humerus typically forward, which is going to shorten a lot of these tissues. And then as a result of that, these are going to begin to shorten, they're going to constrict, and it's going to inhibit the range of motion and function of how my shoulder and my humerus relate to one another. So in part, what we want to start to look at is the relationship between where the rib cage, the shoulder girdle, which I'd kind of broadly define as your scapula and collarbones on the front side, and head are in space. So how do those three systems relate to one another, and how can we better improve that relationship so that when we do go through, say, something like thoracic extension, we can actually start to work on the scapula and the humerus going through retraction and some level of external rotation. Then through some of that external rotation, can I actually learn to rest here and have this as my more, we'll say, default mode of kind of being seated or rested in my posture. If we can start to do those things and introduce that to our body and our nervous system in a way that isn't overly stimulating, but in a way that we can actually start to program that in and have that as our new default, then the chances of us coming back to positions like this, which can lead to shoulder impingement, will be significantly reduced. So that's what we're gonna get into for the remainder of this video, is how to actually get into kind of a little bit of a different posture. Some people call this an upright posture. We don't want this to be rigid, but we want to have adaptability while we're here. So we're gonna work on this postural position as well as some exercises that's going to reinforce some of the musculature around our lats and our serratus to better support it. All right, so for our first technique, we are going to be working on creating some space and expansion in through our upper ribs as promised. So for this, all you're going to need is a chair. You're going to take your arms behind you, and you can go on your knuckles here just to provide a little bit of support. You can also use some books if you wanted a little bit of support there as well. And what we're going to work on is gently, And I want to emphasize this gently, creating a little bit of retraction and external rotation of the humerus. I don't want it to be here where you just jam it back as hard as you can. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for probably, I would say 2 inches to about, we'll say 3 centimeters for my metric folk, kind of pulling back enough so that we create a little bit of space between where our pec and really the head of the humerus are. If we can do that positionally and then allow our structure to come up and just be supported off of it, we're going to try to hang out here while we start to introduce some pressure in through these upper ribs. Now be mindful that when you're going through your inhale, you're not breathing strictly into the neck and you're getting a big stress response. Try to gently draw your breath in over the course of about 5 seconds, trying to feel the last 10 to 15% of your breath kind of fill out these upper ribs, kind of in a cylindrical fashion. So what this will look like is if I am in this position, internal rotation, I'm collapsing through the upper ribs, I'm gonna press the knuckles down, I'm gonna allow the shoulder blades to come back a little bit. My whole rib cage is lifting vertically here. So I'm thinking about getting tall, and then we're gonna start to introduce that gentle aspect to the breath. So I'm gonna take an inhale. Slow exhale over about 5 seconds. And I want you to notice that when I did that, I didn't allow these upper ribs to collapse. So whenever tension I'm getting via the pressure, we're trying to sustain that. So when I go through the exhale, I'm not going to lose that entirely. I can keep a conversation here and I didn't collapse. And then with each consecutive inhale, we're trying to build more into that expansion and offer a little bit more extension. The more we can have that felt sense that we're supported through the shoulders relative to the breath that we're carrying in or bringing in, the more length that we're ultimately going to create through here. If you can go through this well, you should feel like you're getting a nice pec stretch and your whole structure is lengthening kind of vertically in the process. I would encourage you to go through that for anywhere between 60 to about 90 seconds, 5-second draw in to a 5-second draw out, having a smooth cadence with your breath as best as you can. For our next exercise, we're gonna do one of my personal favorites for almost anything shoulder related. It's very low impact and I find it's a nice way to create some length as well as introduce some nice feedback into the lats and serratus. So we're gonna do a serratus roll up is what I call it. I'm sure it has different names. You can use a foam roller and that would be preferable if you do have access to one. But if you don't, you can use a water bottle that you can place in the same fashion that we're gonna do with the foam roller. Something that you can roll on. If you don't have a water bottle that's gonna roll on the wall, you can even hold a book or something here as well. You're not gonna get as much of a feel of the roll with it, but it does work here. So what we're gonna be doing with the foam roller, so we're gonna take it in front of us like so, and we're gonna take the middle of our forearm right onto the foam roller. So I'm gonna be in this position here, and we're gonna wanna be mindful of a couple things. The first thing that we're gonna wanna be mindful of is that our shoulder blades don't immediately go into a lot of retraction, as this can actually contribute to shoulder impingement. And we also don't want to be in any type of kyphosis or overextension. I want you to just try to find kind of where that neutral balance is for you. And we're going to try to have the shoulder blades relatively far away from our spine in an attempt to get some serratus and lat feedback. So I'm having what's called a scapular protraction. We're going to begin to do a roll up through the elbows. And as we do that, I can immediately feel my serratus start to work. I'm almost trying to sense that my scapula here is gently going into a posterior tilt on my ribs. And I can kind of feel that it's staying connected to the ribs in the process of that. And I'm not going into any sort of extensive lordosis of my lower back in the process. So I'm being mindful that my lumbar is staying neutral. Then what we're gonna do is take a couple breaths here. We're gonna gently start to bring this down, again, without collapsing here. So I'm keeping that height in my upper body. And then we're just gonna do our work. So I'm gonna roll up, 2 breath cycles, keeping this height in my structure. And now as I begin to roll down, I'm gonna be trying to keep that height in my structure. What I would recommend that you do is as you go through the roll up, try to take targeted inhales into your upper ribs here. Think about the area just beneath your collarbones. And we're trying to not only create height with the breath, but also width in through that area. The more that we can keep ourselves kind of suspended off that pressure while we're building that serratus and lat connection, the more unconscious this position with our body is going to become over time. And it's going to be getting us out of that tendency of going into a lot of internal rotation here. So get familiar with that. I would work anywhere between about 10 to 12 reps. You're going to do about 3 to 4 seconds up to 3 to 4 seconds down with 2 breaths at the top. So what good is all this corrective work if we're not linking it to some form of movement? So that is what we're going to get into now. This is one of my personal favorites in terms of warm up, getting the shoulder girdle and everything just kind of dynamically linked to your body. And this is something that I personally use for pretty much any workout that I'm going to be going into as a way to kind of mobilize and connect my shoulders to my full body. So what this is going to look like is you're going to take your feet about shoulder width and just try to have kind of a decent base through the feet. And you're going to take one arm into external rotation. So you can think you're turning your palm up. And the other arm, you're going to take across this way into internal rotation as if you're throwing a left hook, is how you can kind of think about it if you've done any type of boxing. So we're going to be in this position here with a slight rotation, in this case to my right. And then we're going to open our left arm and our right arm is going to come across. And really what we're emphasizing is this pec stretch and external rotation here as we start to add that rotation. What I would encourage you to start with is just get used to kind of swinging the arm open as you close the other one and just kind of allowing your body weight to kind of gradually shift from one side to the other. You can almost feel how the momentum of your arms here pulls you kind of from one side to the other. So my left arm goes out, it's pulling me, my right arm comes out and it's pulling me. As you get used to this, you can actually work through it quite dynamically. And this is probably about the pace that I go at in terms of warm up. And I'm just kind of allowing my arms to create this rhythm for my upper body to create rotation around. And it's taking your shoulders really through almost every range outside of this plane of motion. So we're not doing a lot of up and down necessarily, but we are getting a lot of this internal and external rotation of the humerus, and the scapula is going through both protraction and a little bit of retraction on this backside. So what I would recommend here in terms of rep range, once you get the coordination, is probably about 12 to 14 per side, and see if you can incorporate the lower body into that. And you'll really start to feel how the rib cage and shoulders relate to one another, as well as you get a nice sense of space through the shoulders in the process. So that is going to wrap this week's video on how to hopefully better improve some of that shoulder impingement or feeling of anterior shoulder pain. Something to keep in mind as it relates to the shoulder impingement or really anything that you're dealing with in your body is what we cover here is just a small piece of a broader program that you should be working through. We do want some aspects of strength. We want our corrective work. We want some type of movement-based training where we're taking our body through global ranges of motion, ideally through some rhythm. If you're looking for a broader and more specific understanding to not only the shoulders, but really how everything in your body relates to one another, you can check out my new program called the Core 7 down in the description below. It costs you a total of $0, and it is gonna go over 14 different corrective techniques pretty much from the bottom up, right from your ankles all the way to your head. As always, I appreciate your time and you checking out these videos. If you're new here, you can like, you can subscribe, do all the YouTube things that the algorithm appreciates, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.